Hey there, so are you curious about the best kind of nonprofit you should be starting in 2022? I got you. We're going to talk about it. Let's get into it. Hey everyone, it's Tiffany here with Boss on a Budget. I help new and small nonprofits get up and running. If you need help with your nonprofit, make sure you are subscribed to this channel because I'm dropping videos every week, y'all. So I wanted to share some insight on the best kind of nonprofit to start in the year 2022. So as I'm recording this, it is January, and I thought it would be helpful for people who are watching this channel who are not sure if they want to start a nonprofit or not, or they're trying to figure out which direction to go. I'm going to talk about the best kind of nonprofit to start in 2022. And before I give you the answer, if you are planning for a nonprofit, make sure you check out my nonprofit business bundle. It includes 3 different workbooks to help you plan before you start the paperwork process, before you decide which direction you're going to go. Those 3 workbooks help give you a good action plan for starting your nonprofit. So I know you're curious and you're like, Tiffany, well, what kind of nonprofit should I be starting? So the answer to that question is whatever nonprofit your community needs. Now, you thought I was going to say, hey, start this kind of nonprofit, this kind of nonprofit, but actually it really matters more to the people that you're serving, right? So there's information and there's data that tell you that something is needed and missing in your community. And so you need to go where the data and the information are telling you, not based off of what you want to do or what you feel like doing. So I'm going to give you 3 strategies to help you figure out what your community best needs so that you can create the best nonprofit for your community. And side note, when I say the word community, I don't necessarily mean geographic community. It could be just that. It could be a neighborhood, it could be a town or city, but it also could be a community of people with like experiences. So maybe there's a community of people who have aged out of foster care. That's its own community, right? Or it could be a community of moms with kids who have autism. That's a particular community. So when I say community, I mean the particular type of people that you want to help. You need to be looking at what their needs are, okay? So I'm going to give you 3 strategies to help you plan based on what your community says it needs. So the first thing you need to do is a needs assessment. And before you do any kind of project or any kind of initiative, this is just a good place to start, right? If you want to make any changes in an area, you first need to understand what the real problem is, because you don't want to put interventions in place or put strategies in place that are completely misaligned with what the real issues are. So my recommendation is for you to do a needs assessment, and that is basically gathering data and information to identify what the problems are and to identify what the potential solutions can be, right? So I always recommend that if you're trying to start a nonprofit, first of all, you interview the people who are very close to your target population. They look like your target population, they have similar experiences as your target population, and you ask them questions. You ask them, what are they struggling with? Why is it such a problem? What has worked in the past? What is being put in place now but it's not working? So the whole point of that is to figure out what's working and what's not working so you can identify the gaps to figure out where you can fit in terms of your services. Part of your needs assessment also means you should be looking at quantitative data. So quantitative data in the simplest form is just data that can be counted, data that are in numbers, right? So you can be looking at statistics on your population. You can be looking at the data that say how big your community is or how big the problem is in your community. You should be looking at any journal articles or any studies that have been done on your particular community. You need to be doing a literature scan, right? A literature review of all the information that's out there on your target population. It doesn't have to be completely exhaustive, but you need to look at least 5 or 6 different data sources, and they could be journal articles, they could be statistical reports, data reports, reports from your local social services or local government agencies, because they put out data all the time to help you get a sense of the problem. So you want to get a sense of how big the problem is and where the problem is happening so that you can figure out the best way to address it. I'm gonna give you a very concrete example. So maybe you're working with young people who are struggling in math, right? And so you go and you identify test scores from the local Department of Education. You also look at other nonprofits in the area that are doing tutoring services or after school services. You're talking to those people to figure out what's working, what's not working, and you realize that there are not a lot of people who are helping young people when they're at the basics, right? So if they don't get what they need in third grade, the basics of multiplication, subtraction, and all that, it really impacts people down the line. And there are not a lot of people who are addressing it early on. So the data are leading you in a direction to say, well, maybe we should be designing a math tutoring program specifically for third graders and maybe even second graders to prepare them for that time in the third grade. So me going through this reasoning is me using the data to make smart decisions about how to address certain things. Now I'm gonna tell you why this is important. Because when you start your nonprofit, when you're asking for money, people are going to want you to identify why you need the money and where the money is going towards, right? And so you need to be able to talk about the problem in an eloquent way so it shows that this was missing, this wasn't happening, and we're filling the gap. When you present yourself as someone filling the gap, as an organization that's unique, that stands out, that no one else is looking at a particular issue, then it gives people a sense of trust and that the fact that you're doing something good and they want to address it because no one else is looking at it. So my first recommendation is just gather a lot of data. Don't make assumptions about what's happening. Make sure you can back it up with information, and that's information from people who are experiencing the issue. That's information from people who are serving the people experiencing the issue, and then also any data or journal articles that are talking about the issue. My second piece of advice as you're building your nonprofit and making decisions about what way you want to go is to build community, right? So a lot of people make this mistake when they're starting their nonprofit. They center it around the organization itself. They try to engage people saying, I'm starting a new organization. Do you want to help with this organization, right? We need to help get this organization in place. Instead of leading with, we saw that there was an issue in our community. Do you care about this issue? Let's work on solutions together. People get fired up by things that resonate with them. And it's rare that starting a nonprofit resonates with people. The why of why you're starting a nonprofit resonates with people, but not the fact that you're starting a new organization. How many times have you seen posts on social media where people are like, hey, I started a new business? People kind of are supportive, but that's not what get people motivated. People get motivated when they see that there's a problem and that someone has a solution to address it. And so if that problem hits close to home to somebody, maybe they're experiencing it now or in the past, or they know someone who's experiencing it and they want to feel like they can do something to help address it because of their connection to the issue, that's what get people fired up. So my suggestion to you is to build a community of people who are fired up about the cause, fired up about the mission. They want to change something. People get motivated by the idea of changing something, and you're building that momentum. I always say when you're starting a new nonprofit and you're grassroots and you're community based, you're building a movement. So you have to identify what is that movement centered around. And just with my last example, that movement is centered around kids are getting left behind, right? So the schools are working so fast, they're not letting the kids get the basics, and kids are getting left behind. We know by third grade that if they don't get it together by then it tells the story of their whole educational career. We're going to stop that in its tracks, right? There are a lot of people who are connected to the education system or who may have served or taught these kids who care and think the same thing. Think the same way as you. So you want to make sure you're building a movement, building a community around your cause. And my third piece of advice before you start launching your nonprofit is to build a solid financial plan. This is one of the number one mistakes that people make when they're starting their nonprofit. They make a lot of assumptions about what 501c3 status brings them. And of course, I'm talking specifically to people who want to be charitable nonprofits and those who receive 501c3 status. If you don't quite understand what 501c3 status is, make sure you check out this video that I'm linking above because I break it down in this video, okay? So people assume that once they get that status, that for some reason it's a magic door and then the donations start pouring in. They believe that once they get their status, that grant funders will just start throwing money at them, and that once people in the community know that you have 501c3 status, they're just going to automatically start donating. And that is the farthest from the truth. So I want to wake you up right now if you're making that assumption. Don't ever make assumptions about where your money is coming from, especially in times like this when we're talking in 2022, when things are so uncertain, when we're looking at inflation, when we're looking at still being in the middle of a pandemic. You don't want to ever assume anything when it comes to finances. And you still have to operate as a business, as a nonprofit. You still need money to survive. So my biggest advice is to build a solid financial plan. Come up with a realistic budget for the things that you're trying to do in your first year, and try to project it out for at least 3 years so you can see how you want to scale, you want to see how you want to grow. Think about all the things you want to accomplish from year to year to year, and then assign numbers to that. How much would it cost to do that? And then ask yourself, what are the different revenue sources that we're going to pursue to make up that money? And it can't just all be grants. My biggest advice around that is to diversify. I often talk about my GIF strategy. So it's grants, those small local-based grants, individuals for I, which is asking individuals for donations, and then F for fee for service, which is figuring out how to identify a product or service that you can sell so you can have access to unrestricted money. So like pursuing those kind of strategies as a new nonprofit will help solidify your financial base so you're not unsteadily depending on just one income source. So project out how much money you're going to need to do your work, and then where your money is going to come from. And obviously it takes time and effort to start building up those revenue sources. So plan how you're going to do that. How are you going to build those revenue sources? How are you going to go after grants? How are you going to get those donations and all that kind of stuff, okay? So if you're feeling like a nonprofit is the way you want to go, then also make sure you check out my video, How to Start a Nonprofit, because I go into a lot of detail about how to start a nonprofit. So make sure you have a notebook and a pen nearby, because you'll be taking a lot of notes on that particular video. If you need help with your nonprofit, if you need other resources, don't forget to check me out at www.bossonabudget.com. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video.